All right, so it is 11:30, so we will go ahead and get started. So first of all, if we haven't met, my name's Lori Dunnigan. I am one of the coaches with the PC program, so I work closely with Jody and Brittany. Brittany is on vacation right now, and I wish we could all be with her, but we're not, we're here. And so I will be teaching the class today. Today we're going to talk about contracts. But I know that you guys get already on Thursday with the contracts Kung Fu, you already get the purchase agreement and the listing agreement, and you get the disclosures. So today we're going to talk about a couple of different forms. I want to talk about the requests for repairs and the contingency removal form. And then depending on how much time we have, we might talk about the AVID. And then if you guys want to talk about any other forms, we might be able to do that as well, just depending on how fast this goes and how many questions you guys have. If you're able to, please turn on your cameras because it's easier to teach when I know who I'm talking with. And then also if you guys have any questions, I do like my classes to be interactive, so feel free to, chime in and ask me any questions that you might have as we go. Have you guys used these forms yet in the past, the request for repair or the contingency removal forms? Okay, so I see no, I know at least.
I practiced a little bit.
Good, awesome. It's always best to practice with ourselves rather than practicing with an actual client. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Let me pull this over really quick. Okay, and I don't know why it's showing up in a short format. Are you guys cutting off on B? Is it cutting off? Okay, and that's where it's cutting off on me as well, so that's okay. Okay, so request for repair. When we go under contract and the buyer does all of their inspections, they have an option to then ask for any repairs that they feel need to be done. One of the things that we want to do is we always want to be managing our clients' expectations at all times. And so the requests for repairs are one place where we really want to make sure we're managing their expectations. I always tell my clients, both my buyers and my sellers, that when they see the inspection reports, they can be a little bit overwhelming and they can be a little bit scary, that they can be like 30 or 40 pages long, and basically it's going through and it's highlighting everything that's wrong with the house. And it's easy to read those reports and think, oh my God, this is a money pit, the house is falling down, I don't want it. But I always tell people, if you look around your house, most likely there are things that need to be fixed in your house, and there are things that you will eventually get to, and maybe things that you'll never even get to, that you just, it's okay. And so when you're buying a house, it's the same thing. The house is not going to be 100% perfect. And so when we are looking at a request for repair and we're looking at the inspection reports and we're deciding what items we want to ask for, who knows what type of items we want to ask for? Anybody?
Health and safety.
Health and safety. Definitely health and safety, and maybe big ticket items. We want to be focusing on the items that will be like a deal killer. Like if it needs, let's say it needs a new roof. If they don't get a new roof, they're willing to walk away. That's the type of thing that we're looking for. The other thing where it's good to manage expectations, though, is that, sometimes you can have a transaction where the seller will agree to put a new roof. But when you're looking at a house, if you can tell that the roof is in bad condition, you might point that out to the buyer and kind of pre-warn them, hey, look, this is going to need a new roof, and I don't know if the seller is going to be willing to pay for that. So just a heads up that might be the situation that we get into as we proceed with this. So the first thing that we want to do on the request for repair is we want to number it. So obviously the very first request for repair is going to be number 1. Hopefully, ideally in a transaction, we are only going to have 1 request for repair. The last thing that we want to do is go to the seller with multiple requests for repairs, but the place where we would have multiple requests would be if we are negotiating back and forth on the request for repair, and we abandon one and take on, and do a second one. So we want to make sure that we have done all of our inspections before we submit any type of request for repairs. And when I say all of our inspections, I'm also including the appraisal, because a lot of times the appraiser will say, okay, the house appraises at this dollar amount, but only if these repairs are done. So those are called conditions. And so a lot of times people think, okay, we're going to do, the general home inspection, we'll do the pest inspection, maybe we'll do a roof inspection, and then we're done and we can submit our request. But no, we want to wait for that appraisal to come in as well. As with our other contracts, date prepared is simply date prepared. So even if I'm not going to submit this to them until Thursday, when I get the next report back, I'm preparing it today. So I'm going to put today's date. Most of the time, the request for repair is going to be in accordance with the purchase agreement. So this top line will be blank. So this dated, who knows what date goes here where it says dated? Anybody?
Contract
Greg?
date. Redmond?
Yeah, Greg, you were muted. Valerie, yes, contract date. So whatever the date of the RPA was, that's the date that's going to go there. If you had another form listed here instead of the RPA, then it would be the date of whatever that form was. At this point, so when we submit an offer on a house, we don't know who the seller is. And so we don't, fill in the seller's information. But at the point in time when we're submitting a request for repair, we do know who the seller is. And so we do want to go ahead and put the seller's name in here. And part of the reason for that is because your compliance department requires it. And if you don't put it here, then your transaction coordinator has to go back in and fill that information out. And it's just more work on their part. So go ahead and fill it out if you know it, which again, you would know it by this point. Okay. So one thing that's really interesting, and I don't personally agree with it, but they don't ask my opinion on these contracts. It says right here that the seller has no obligation to respond to the buyer request, which I think is rude and frustrating, and they should have an obligation to respond, even if the answer is no, we're not doing anything, but they technically don't have an obligation. I had a transaction last year where the seller responded. It was kind of hard to read, but they responded on the back of an envelope. Like this was their response, handwritten. And I'm like, okay. But I guess at least I should have been happy that I got a response, right? But I would suggest that you guys respond, even if it's like we're not going to do any repairs. So right here on number A, we're going to check this box, which says that the buyer is going to request that the seller do these items. And I don't have a sample report with me, but when we're putting the items on here, we want to be very specific about how we're asking for the items. So let's say that there's a broken window in the kitchen, and that when we got our inspection report, that was listed as item 2B on page 3 of the inspection report, right? So here I'm going to write item 2B of inspection report. And depending on how many things I'm writing, I might not write this on all of them. Seller 2, and I'm guessing if it's a broken window, I want the seller to replace it, right? So I'm going to put replace broken window in kitchen. if I can type. So now this way, the seller knows exactly what I'm talking about, and they can even reference the inspection report that shows them, you know, usually they'll have a picture of it. Now let's say that it's a ceiling fan that's not working. So first of all, if it's a ceiling fan that's not working, I would probably recommend that the buyer not ask for that, because that's a simple enough thing to fix. But sometimes buyers will insist on asking for that kind of stuff. So let's put that. Okay. So a ceiling fan. Okay. So this is going to be item 3C. Seller 2. Okay, so we have a broken ceiling fan. What do we want the seller to do? Greg, can you unmute?
Fix or replace.
Fix or replace. Is that what you're going to say, Greg? And Greg, if you weren't talking, I just saw your, it looked like you were saying something. If you were talking to someone else in the room or you were eating or something, you don't have to, if that's what it was, then I apologize for asking you to unmute. But sometimes if you're like me, you forget that you're muted, so. Okay, so Maria said seller 2, fix or replace ceiling fan. You can ignore my misspelling. Ceiling fan in living room, right? Okay. Can you guys see something that might be a potential issue when I put fix or replace ceiling fan in living room?
Maybe the replacement is not something that would be satisfactory to the buyer.
Correct. What would be the reason it wouldn't be satisfactory?
You know, it could be a number of things. Could be aesthetic. It could be, you know, just cheaply made. So yeah, not of the same quality as the original.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's one of the things that we always have to, again, we're managing expectations. Most likely a ceiling fan isn't going to be able to be fixed, right? Because they're just not items that we fix. We just replace them. But if we replace it, so let's say that's a $500 ceiling fan that's really cute and it's the style that I like. And then we get the keys or we go to the final walkthrough and it's got a cheapy $75 ceiling fan that is something that I would never want or buy, right? Well, did the seller do what we asked them to do? They did, right? They replaced it. So what can we put here that would add more clarification?
Replace the ceiling fan, the fan what I want.
Exactly, right?
And attach a picture.
But we could put replace ceiling fan in living room with the same or similar style, right? So that tells them that we really want that same ceiling fan. We just want a fixed one. What's something else that we could do?
Ask for credit.
We could ask for a credit, right? And then that way the buyer can go in and put whatever they want. What's the potential issue with asking for a credit on anything, but we'll just talk about the ceiling fan. So we've got a broken ceiling fan, right? Which a broken ceiling fan can mean a bunch of different things, but we know it's broken, it's not working. We're going to ask for a credit. Where can we get into a little bit of an issue with asking for a credit?
Isn't it because the credit is usually covering the closing cost of the escrow? So
yeah. So definitely. And so when we ask for a credit, we can ask for a credit on the request for repairs, but we don't necessarily want the request for repairs to go to the lender. So we would also do an addendum. If once it's agreed on, we would do an addendum. And instead of asking for a $300 credit to fix the ceiling fan, we're going to ask for a $300 credit towards closing costs. But we can only do that if we're not already asking for our maximum closing costs. So if we've already asked with our offer for the seller to pay 3% in closing costs, there might not be any more closing costs that are available that we can put towards a repair request. So that's one thing to keep in mind. And that's something where you're communicating with the lender and you're knowing what's the maximum amount of closing costs that we can use. But there's something else I was looking for. Any idea what could be an issue with asking for a credit?
It's always negotiable. And so, you know, the seller could come back with, say, you know, I'll give you half of that, or, you know, just not the value of what you're hoping to get. You know, it's an ask.
Yeah, that's definitely the case. And that's also the case when we're asking for them to fix or replace it, because they could come back and say, no, we won't do that as well. But you bring up a good point with the credit. There's maybe a higher chance that they're going to come back and ask to split the difference on that. What's something else?
I have another idea, maybe because instead of like giving a credit, they would take on the next offer or something, like, no?
Well, I mean, that would be a possibility if we're asking for a huge credit or something and we can't come to terms on the request for repairs, because if we don't come to terms on the request for repairs, then the next step is to cancel the escrow, right? Either we come to an agreement or we don't. And if we don't, then we cancel. And at that point, they could come, you know, have another offer. But prior to that, so I'm going to give you an example that an agent had not too long ago. So they had asked for a credit towards, it was for plumbing. So it was a lot more than just a ceiling fan. They had a plumber come out, give them an estimate. It was going to be, I forget the exact dollar amounts, but I think it was going to be like a $6,000 fix to fix the plumbing issue. And so the buyer went to the seller, said, hey, there's a $6,000 issue here with the plumbing. Can I get a credit for that? Seller said, yes, here's your $6,000 credit. Everybody's happy. They close escrow. And now the buyer knows that they have this $6,000 that they can then go and fix the plumbing issues, right? Sounds perfect. Plumber comes out, starts, you know, digging into, you know, what the pipes or whatever it was. And oops, guess what? The issue was a lot more in depth than what they thought it was going to be. And now instead of it being a $6,000 repair, it's a $12,000 repair. What recourse does the buyer have at that point when now it's a $12,000 repair after we've closed escrow?
Probably none.
None. So that's the risk with asking for a credit, is that if it ends up being different than what the quote was, you're out of luck. So just keep that in mind. Of course, we're talking about a ceiling fan here, but you know, the ceiling fan, maybe it ends up not being the fan that's not working. Maybe it's the electrical part of it that's up in the ceiling. And then, you know, and so if we ask the seller to replace the fan, then when they put the new fan in, we can verify that it works, right? Now, what if your buyer says, like bringing this won't happen, but bringing these two scenarios together, what if the buyer says, okay, I'm willing to buy the fan and replace it to make sure that it works before we close? Is that a good idea or not a good idea? So buyer's going to replace it and fix it before we close escrow.
No, because if it falls out, they just bought the seller a new fan.
Exactly. Exactly. So there are scenarios where things will come up and buyers are like, okay, let me just do that. And it's like, and usually not with a ceiling fan, but maybe it has to do with, like for a pest inspection, you can't have, I mean, they'll call out like chipped and peeled paint. And so it's simple enough if a buyer's a handy person, well, let me go and I'll fix that. But maybe you just painted, you know, a certain area of the seller's house because now we fall out of escrow. So you just want to be very clear when you're putting in requests that you are being specific about what the buyer wants, explaining to the buyer that even though we're specific, it still might not be exactly what we wanted. So like if there's a hole in the wall and we ask the seller to patch the hole in the wall, we have no control over what that's going to look like, right? Maybe they patch it and they don't paint it. So then we ask them, can you patch it and paint it? Maybe they don't use the same exact paint color, right? So there could be issues that come up. So just be aware of that, right? What the other thing that I usually tell my sellers is, so when you get the home inspection report in particular, I want you to view it, not my sellers, but my buyers. I want you to view it more as a honey-do list. So they're giving you a list of things that once you move in, over time, you're gonna fix these things, right? And then we only want to ask for the things that, again, are health, safety, major dollar items. Are there any questions on this? Yes, Adina?
I have one question, but I don't know if it makes sense. But can the buyer ask for request of repair after all the contingencies removed?
So they can ask for it, but if the inspection contingency has already been removed, the seller is less inclined to give them or to fix those items for them.
Okay.
Okay, so this goes, so there's, you know, you can put a few lines of information here. If it goes, you know, if your request goes over the amount of lines here, it'll just attach an addendum automatically. So, you know, there's plenty of room to type here. Number B would relate to a pest inspection. So if you do a pest inspection and you want like all of the section 1 items to be repaired or all of the section 2 items to be prepared, instead of putting it up in A, you can just mark the boxes in number B and reference the report. One thing on the pest inspection reports, if you haven't seen them, sometimes, so there'll be section 1 items, there'll be section 2 items, there'll be like maybe other items that need to be fixed. And then sometimes they'll give you a quote on the repairs. Usually the quote only pertains to the actual like treatment for the termites and not like fixing some of the boards. So let's say the fascia boards needs to be fixed and it needs to be treated for subterranean termites and there's a bunch of other stuff. Just make sure that you're really looking at, if they attach a quote to the inspection report, that it's not, you don't think it's everything. So just keep that in mind, because a lot of times, or most of the time, a pest inspection company they can only do the treatment of the termites. They can't do the other items, and so they'll only quote you for those. The other thing is, so on number C, we can ask for a credit right here. So if we just want to ask for a credit, we can just put a dollar amount here. The only thing I don't like about using C is that it doesn't give you an opportunity to tell them what you're requesting the credit for. And I think it helps to have that information on here just so the seller knows. So if you're just doing it here, then maybe put in the email when you send it to the agent, we're asking for a credit and it's going to be for these items, or just ask for the credit up in number A and don't mark number C. But don't ask. Yes.
I was gonna say, would it be better if we just put in right there the total of, let's say we have multiple items and we're either requesting them to prepare it or to give a credit of it, and then we can put down right there the total amount all equal? Would that be smart? Or
you can, but the only thing is, if I ask for a $500 credit up here, so that they can fix the ceiling fan, let me see. So I'm going to ask for the $500 credit up here. Obviously, I wouldn't just type in 500. And then I come down here and I ask for a $500 credit. I just asked for $1,000 in credit.
oh, okay.
So it kind of needs to be in one or the other.
All right.
On number 2, this is where we're going to attach the report. So if we're referencing an inspection report or a pest report or a pool inspection report, we're just going to put this up here. And usually I'll write, you know, home inspection report by right here, final touch inspections. And then, so in number 3, it says FHA or VA, if the lender requires, let me see, FHA or VA lender requires specific actions in the appraisal or other lender document if and then if checked attached. So what this is basically saying is that usually a lender is going to require something because it's called out on the appraisal report, or they might require, like if you have a VA buyer, they're going to require the pest clearance. And so this is where you can, you know, put some of that stuff. So does all of this make sense so far? Do you guys have any questions on any of this? Okay. So then this is something that I think that a lot of agents might miss. Is it goes down to contingency removal. So we all know that in order for a buyer or a seller to remove a contingency, it has to be done in writing. And we have the CR form, which is the contingency removal form. And I'm going to pull up that and go over that in just a minute. But that form is used to remove contingencies, right? But number 4 right here says, if seller agrees to all of the buyer's requests on this request for repairs form, or some of the buyer's requests, and then buyer accepts a seller partial agreement, then the buyer agrees to remove the investigation of property contingency. So that's the standard language right there. So if you asked for repairs, seller comes back, says, yes, I will do all of your repairs, your buyer has just removed their inspection contingency. And it's important that the buyer knows that. And so make sure you point that out to the buyer. Now, there are other options, so they can remove the investigation property except for, and then you can put whatever part of that investigation contingency you don't want to remove, or you can send the form CR and put on there what contingencies you are or are not removing. Ideally, if you're at the point where you are submitting a request for repairs, you are finished with your inspections, and your buyer should be good to remove them at this point, but just make sure that they're aware that that's what's happening. And then you can put an expiration date. I usually don't put an expiration date. And then the buyer signs here. And then we send this over with the reports to the seller's agent, and then they present it with their seller. Assuming that they respond back, they're going to respond back here. What options? Wait, do I have a question?
I do have a question, just to reiterate. If the seller agrees to fulfill all the contingencies, the inspections are waived. Is that what you said?
Not the inspections, but the inspection contingency is removed.
Inspection contingency removed. Thank you.
And so what that means is that if the buyer then wants to back out of the transaction based off an inspection issue, they can still do that, but they won't get their EMD back.
What's EMD?
It's their initial deposit.
Right.
It's funny because for years we've referred to it as the EMD, which is the earnest money deposit. And in the RPA, it refers to it as the initial deposit. And I'm just still used to that old language, but the EMD.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any questions on that or anything else so far? Okay, so when the seller receives the buyer's request for repairs, what options do they have?
Do it, repair it, right?
Yes.
Or he can also do a counter repair request or something.
Yes. And there's another one.
There's another one.
There's two more.
Two more. Oh gosh.
So they
Oh,
can,
reject it, not do it.
they can reject it and not do it.
What's the fourth one? I'm out of ideas.
The fourth one, wait, anybody know what the fourth one is?
Just ignore it.
Yeah.
Let the time, let the clock run out.
They can essentially ignore it. Yeah. Again, I don't recommend that. So those are the options. And so if the seller accepts it as is, then again, the buyer's inspection contingency is gone, or depending on what they marked on the contingency removal part of that. If the buyer says, if the seller comes back and says, okay, I'll do 1, 2, and 3, but I'm not doing 4, then that gets sent back to the buyer. And then what does buyer have the option of doing?
Which one we are doing now?
Accepting
So
or rejecting.
Yes,
that.
so the seller had said, I'll fix 1, 2, and 3, but I'm not going to fix 4. So we send that back to the buyer, and then the buyer has the option of accepting it or rejecting it, right? If they reject it, then essentially they're going to send another buyer counteroffer, and not buyer counteroffer, another request for repair, and the negotiation continues, right? If the buyer says, okay, we're happy with that, we're going to get 1, 2, and 3 fixed, so we accept that, then at that point the buyer's inspection contingency is removed.
Okay.
Okay.
Wait, I have a question, sorry. So if the seller decides to ignore it, then what happens?
Well, hopefully at some point you're going to find out as the buyer's agent that the seller ignored it, and then you come back to your buyer and you say, okay, they're not responding, so what are we going to do? Are we going to send a new one? Are we going to be okay that they're not going to replace anything? That's why I think that shouldn't be allowed, that they don't have to respond. But
yeah, so if the seller keeps ignoring it, then what do? You just give up?
I mean, you would be communicating with the seller's agent, and they're going to have some type of information for you, and that information just might be that they refuse to do any repairs at all, or whatever the case might be. But they're not obligated to do anything. So if they say we're not going to do anything, buyer's not okay with that, then that's where the buyer would utilize their inspection contingency to either cancel the contract, or they would decide to move forward with it. And then of course here is where the seller would respond back, and then here's where the buyer would respond back. But basically that's the request for repairs. So I'm going to move on to the contingency removal form, but before I do that, are there any questions?
I got one.
Yes.
Let's say if we're canceling due to the home inspection, is there like somewhere we check on the cancellation of escrow, like, hey, we're canceling due to the home inspection, or hey, we're canceling due to the appraisal, or what would that be at?
There is on the cancellation of escrow form, and if we have time, I can pull it up. There is a box or a place to mark the reason why you're canceling, and you would reference it back to the section in the RPA that talks about, inspections or whatever the case might be.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so let me find my contingency removal form. Okay, so this, again, top information is just like any other form. And then here we're going to look at contingencies. So let me ask you this. How many contingencies does a buyer have when they purchase a home, assuming they don't remove any of their contingencies?
I think it's 8.
Yeah, for the longest time, I only thought it was 3, but it's 8. And so this form shows all the different contingencies that they have. And so depending on where you're at in the transaction or what's going on, you will either select or unselect these options. And I'm not going to go through all of them because there's not really a reason to, but one of the things that I want to point out to you is that, so we look at 2C, the investigation of property, right? So this is your inspection contingency. We have the option of removing the entire buyer's investigation contingency, or there's the part that concerns only the physical attributes of the property, which is what my brain goes to when I think inspection. I'm thinking of the physical things, right? But there's also the investigations other than physical. Do you guys know what those would be? Some of those would be?
Could it be like use,
Title.
Zoning, yeah.
zoning? Yeah.
What's allowed or what's not allowed. Could also be like insurance. Can they get insurance on the house?
Can it be like loan contingency?
Well, the loan has its own contingency. So that would be like a separate contingency. But anything that has to do with the house, so maybe the neighbors, the neighborhood, maybe the school district, those would be non-physical things. But as I say this, if you're in a position where they're going to remove like the physical attributes, but not the entire investigation, go to your contract and make sure you read what that entails, and don't just trust me right now saying, well, that would be the school district, because, you know, make sure you read it and you know it for sure.
Yeah, and it's also the taxes, right? Like we investigated that at length, right? And it was also, you know, it's taxes. And I still think that, because yeah, I waived the entire investigation. I still think I would have had calmer nights if I had just waived the physical attributes. Even though in the end, you know, it all didn't matter, but still.
Yeah. Well, and that's something that you want to, you know, make sure, where's your buyer comfortable? Now, in the contract, they have already identified what days they're going to remove their contingencies. The standard language is 17 days, and you can make that shorter or longer. But in addition to what's already contractually agreed to, you want to make sure that, you know, they know what they're removing. Do you guys know what, so when a buyer removes a contingency, all that is it's a transfer of risk, right? So now, because when a seller accepts a buyer's offer, they're risking essentially, you know, trusting that the buyer's going to follow through with this transaction. And if, you know, 3 weeks into it, the buyer uses their loan contingency and gets out, the seller is out, you know, 3 weeks of time, right? And time has a monetary expense to it as well. And so then when a buyer releases a contingency, they're transferring the risk from the seller to the buyer. As a buyer's agent, though, and this is something that a lot of new agents do. So when you're representing the buyer and you know that the inspection contingency is supposed to be removed at day 17, a lot of new buyer agents want to be like, okay, we have to remove it. We're going to remove it. We're going to remove it. Never remove a contingency unless the selling side requests you to do it. There are many transactions that I have done that the entire length of the transaction contingencies were never removed. And so as a buyer's agent, that's an ideal situation to be in. So never like offer it up if you don't have to. But again, when you do the request for repairs, it kind of automatically puts it out there. So any questions on this form? I know I didn't go over it in a lot of detail, but do you guys have any questions on it?
I do.
Krista?
So yeah, I always thought it was just 3. So are you saying all 8 of these are on the RPA?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And so when you look at the RPA, right here, give me just a second. I don't know how well you can see my screen, but right here, this whole section right here is contingencies. And so they are all listed right there. And they all have the option, all by standard language, they're all 17 days, but you can make them shorter or longer if you want to. Making them longer weakens your offer, but making them shorter can also be risky. Be aware that if your buyer has they're getting a loan, and they have to have the appraisal, which if they get a loan, they have to have an appraisal. And you're gonna put like a 10-day contingency period on those. Make sure you're checking with the lender that that can be done within 10 days, because sometimes lenders can't do it in 10 days. So always check that first. Any other questions on this form? Nope. Okay. I was going to go, we have 15 minutes left. I was going to switch over to the AVID. I know Carlos asked about the cancellation of escrow. Is there any particular form that you guys want me to go to, or are you good with me going to the AVID? Do you want me to go to the cancellation of escrow?
Let's do the AVID.
Okay. Anyone else? Are we good with that? Okay. Can you guys see the AVID on my screen right now? Okay, cool. And I know that my it looks like I'm looking away from you guys, and that's just my camera, so sorry about that. Okay. So the AVID is so as a real estate agent, whether we're representing the buyer or the seller, we have an obligation to do a visual inspection. And let's see. Okay, so we have an obligation to do the visual inspection. On here, and this is for if it's a duplex, triplex, fourplex, we're going to mark this box right here, and then we're going to mark what unit we're doing it for. So if we are doing a duplex, we're going to have two different AVIDs, right? But if it's a standard home, then we don't mark the box, and here we go. One of the things that it's going to ask us on here, so ask down there, so inspection performed by, and so this is going to be Keller Williams right here. However you write it. And then this is basically letting the buyer know that there are certain limitations. So we're not going to be inspecting everything, and it's just a visual inspection. So we're not going to look under the furniture, move the furniture, look behind the furniture, anything like that. We're not going to look into chimneys or in cabinets. So we don't have to open up like the kitchen cabinets and stuff. And so this is basically telling them what we will and will not be inspecting. And then here on the second page, we are going to write the date and time that we inspected it and what the weather conditions are. What's the reason that we're going to write what the weather conditions are?
Maybe a leaky roof.
Yeah, I mean, if it's rainy, we're not going to be able to maybe see things as well as if we can if it's sunny, or in other areas, if there's snow on the ground, then we're not going to be able to necessarily see that there's cracks in the driveway, right? So that gives some information, and then any other person's present. So if the home inspector's there, the buyers are there, whatever, just list them there. Okay, now, so I'm going to go in the living room, and there is this, it's like this big, and it's a black stain on the wall that looks like it's mold. So what am I going to write in the living room?
Stain on the wall.
I heard somebody, but it echoed out. Can you repeat?
Stain on wall.
Stain on wall. Okay, let me write that. Do you guys agree or disagree? Would you guys write something different?
Would you describe the color and size, or would you just leave it?
So we're going to leave it. What's the reason we don't want to put large stain on wall?
Concept of large is not the same as your concept of large.
That's correct. And Pam, you were muted.
Well, I was going to say not large because that is subjective, but could you say something like 3-inch diameter stain? Or
you could, but you don't want to be sitting there with your measuring tape measuring stains, right? So we're just going to put there's a stain on the wall. Okay. but we think it's mold. So do we want to put that it's mold?
No.
No, because we are not environmental experts, right?
Right.
Okay, so we're gonna put stain on wall. Okay, now the stain on the wall is next to the window. So would we put next to the window?
I would say yes.
Yeah. It's okay to put, you know, next to window or near window or whatever. So that way they know which, I would obviously do it all on one line, not like that, but stain on wall next to window. So basically that's what I want to say about what we're describing, is that we're just going to be as basic as we can to still call out the issue. So we're not identifying colors, we're not identifying what it is, we're not identifying if it's big or little. What if you go to a house and it's like, it's only a year old and you can't find anything going on with the house? What are some things that we could probably find in a house that's like perfect?
Mold.
No. So we're not going to probably find mold in a house that's like perfect. And even if we did find mold, we just want to put, you know, stain, not mold. So a lot of
I'm
times,
sorry, you can find like crack on the ceiling now.
yeah, I was going to say maybe there's a crack on the ceiling. A lot of times there's a crack in the driveway or in the cement outside. That's pretty common. So if that's the only thing you can find, at least put that. So it shows that you were there and you did an inspection. So in the dining room, I can't find anything at all wrong with the dining room. So what am I going to put here?
NA.
Nothing observed.
Yep, any of those will do. I usually put nothing noted, nothing observed, NA. Well, actually, NA is a different one. So let's say that there is no, okay, so there's a bedroom 1, and let's say it's only a 1-bedroom house. So what am I going to write under bedroom 2? This is
NA.
where I'm going to write NA. So that just tells me there is no bedroom 2, there is no bedroom 3. Maybe there's no hall or stairs. Usually there's a hallway, but so nothing noted if I don't find anything, and NA if the room doesn't exist. And that the nothing noted at least says I was here and I looked, right? And so there's a couple of places. So like here's a place for other room right here. There's a place for other room down here. There's a place for other room here. And then there's 3 places for other. And so, you know, use those however you want to or need to. Just make sure that if there's something not listed here, that you're putting it here. So like if there's, for example, if there's a 4th bedroom, then under other room, I might put 4th bedroom, and then I'm going to put nothing noted or whatever the case might be. Sometimes on bedroom number 1, I might put a descriptive. So I might do bedroom by the door, by entryway, so that they know which bedroom I'm talking about, but I don't always do that. I've never had to use the addendum for additional rooms or structures, but that's an option. Garage and parking. So here's where I'm talking about the garage and the driveway. Here's where I'm just talking about the general exterior of the building. And then there's this one, other observed or known conditions not specified above. So if I, like, what would be something I would put here?
What about like the patio or fencing?
So that I'm going to either put in the, in like probably the exterior building and yard, front,
Okay.
sides and back.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So this would be just something that I know about the home that isn't disclosed under like the visual aspect of it. I'm trying to think right now, and I know examples, but my brain's not thinking right now. If I know that the home floods maybe I know this for some reason, I know the home floods when it rains real hard, or the garage floods when it rains real hard, then I would put that here. Garage floods when it rains hard. Ignore the typo. So that's something that I know, but I didn't observe it this day.
But would you do that if it's already, you know, mentioned in the seller disclosures?
No, if it's already in the seller disclosures, I probably wouldn't do it, but it's not going to hurt to do it. And keep in mind that, so it's a buyer's responsibility to read and know what they're signing. And at the same time, California has determined there's a whole bunch of information that a buyer needs to be aware of. And so what ends up happening in reality? The buyers don't read everything, right? Or the sellers don't read everything, even though they have to. And so I would hope that they're at least reading the SPQ and the TDS where it would be disclosed by the seller. But so it's not bad to have it here as well. Again, so on this one example, garage floods when it rains hard, who's to say what hard means, right? So I wouldn't word it like that, but and then you're going to sign it here and you're going to sign it down here. So basically this is saying that Keller Williams did the inspection, and it was you that did it, so your name. And then you're also signing it down here as representing the buyer or the seller. So
I have
any
a question, Lori, sorry.
Yes.
It's like, yeah, because there's a lot of beach houses, vacation homes, you know, where I live.
Mhm.
And so there is a mold everywhere. So would you request, I mean, what would would you ask for a credit if it's a mold in the house, or what would you ask for?
So that's going to be up to what the buyer wants to ask for. So if the buyer wants to ask for a credit, if they want to ask for it to be cleaned up, if they don't want to ask for anything, it's completely up to the
buyer.
The buyer. And again, negotiated between buyer and seller. And if we're going to put it on here, we're not writing mold, we're writing, you know, spot on wall.
Okay.
Yeah, spot on wall or whatever.
Okay, thank you.
We really don't even want to put the color if we can avoid putting the color.
Okay,
So,
thanks.
any other questions? Was this helpful to you guys?
I have a question. Would you, I mean, how would you navigate some of this with your seller? Would you, you know, discuss it with them ahead of time? Like, you know, what are some of those dynamics of informing the seller of what you're putting on the AVID? You know, obviously you have to disclose everything you see. I'm just kind of thinking about the seller disclosures and how that relates to things that go on the RPA. And even just things that you might talk to the seller about ahead of time, like, you know, hey, I noticed the ceiling fan isn't working before we get the listing up. Do you want to put, you know, so those kinds of parts of that.
Again, it comes down to managing seller expectations and having conversations with them. And so when you're doing the listing presentation, you might ask them, is there anything in the home that's not working properly that you might want to fix before we put it under contract? And like, if we know that, you know, I mean, that could be anything, right? It could be painting or it could be whatever. Now, we do have to be careful with painting though, because one of the disclosures is going to ask, you know, have you painted in the last 12 months? It's okay that the answer is yes, but the reason they ask that question is kind of to disclose or identify, you know, potential red flags. Okay, if you only painted the ceiling, most people don't paint their ceilings just by themselves, right? So what was the reason you painted the ceiling? Was it to cover up the fact that the ceiling's leaking? So, you know, there's those types of things. But if you're just painting because there's chipped and peeling paint and you want to paint that ahead of time, you know, and just disclose there was chipped and peeling paint and that's why we painted it. So it just comes down to conversation, what a seller is willing to do, what they are not willing to do. And as far as the AVID, yeah, you're doing it. So one of the things, and I hate doing AVIDs when I'm representing the seller, because it's basically me going around their house and pointing out things that are, you know, potential issues. And I don't want it to like insult them, but my duty, I have an equal duty to seller and buyer. So I've got to protect the buyer by putting down, even if I'm representing the seller's agent, I mean, I'm representing the seller, I'm still protecting the buyer, right? By disclosing everything that I know. I'm also protecting the seller because most lawsuits happen because of disclosure items. And if the seller's not disclosing it, I want to make sure that I'm explaining to them why it's important that they do disclose it. And the reality is, a buyer who's in escrow is a lot more willing to accept a defect in a house while they're in escrow and trying to buy it, because they're excited about their new house and they're willing to deal with it, right? But once they move in and they start making the mortgage payment, and then they identify, oh, hey, here's this issue that I was never told about, then they're mad about it, right? So it's way better to disclose things for like all the reasons. Expose it. What's the word I'm looking for? Disclose it. Disclose it while you're in contract. That way you don't get sued afterwards. And our job is to protect the seller from being sued, protect ourselves from being sued to the extent that we can. All right, sound good, guys? Okay, it's 12:32, so I'm going to go ahead and end the meeting, but thank you guys for coming. Thank you guys for having your cameras on for those that you did. Thank you for participating. I like feedback and interactive classes. So